Hello, friends. Host Eric here, also named Eric Strauss, and I'm candidate for president in 2020. Now, the last week or so has been a rather topsy-turvy time for me as I've come to terms with what it means to do the thing I'm doing, and I've decided on a course of action that's consistent with things a couple of people have told me. One of which is something Opaloid told me as a talking with fans people community member, which is that I should begin this as just running as the guy who's running from his garage. There's no reason to put up a backdrop. There's no reason to get dressed up here. I'm just trying to express to everybody that I've got a real plan here, a real policy prescription for what the nation ought to do, and a very clear understanding of how things work. So, the second part of this plan then is to attempt to lay out all those policy prescriptions now in the status quo in such a way that I establish for everybody the legitimacy of my candidacy on policy grounds before I proceed forward with trying to establish the legitimacy of my candidacy on social grounds. In other words, while I have to get out my ideas as a candidate via social vectors, I should delay mobilizing individual people to do things on my behalf for the time being. Obviously, anybody who wants to donate to the campaign is strongly encouraged. I'm seeking donations to the campaign. But what I mean specifically is I'm not going to attempt to mobilize a lot of diverse sorts of actions at the moment. I have a limited amount of attention to direct this, and even if it's all of my attention, there's a limited amount of things I can do. So, having said all of that stuff, noting the general shift in the tenor of the campaign, I think reflects a more correct singular course of strategy for executing the campaign. That's a lot of hocus pocus about the campaign. Let's get to the topic of the live stream, which is the actual platform. And as I'm doing this, I hope to answer anybody who's got anything to say in the chat. Anybody who would like to join me can join me here in appear.in/TWFP1 and ask me any questions they want. Let's start with the overview of the economics and taxation. I'm not going to go over my taxation plan, which is the cryptocurrency plan. Instead, I'm going to go over two areas of understanding economics. So the overview. Our nation's economy is an emergent function of the liberty it protects. When any individual citizen can safely go about her or his business, make decisions, and it freely engage in association and exchange, with any other individual citizen, prosperity results. The Strauss administration will value justice and upholds the value that value by enforcing legal mechanisms in defense of property rights. There needs to be made no distinction between different kinds of property to establish which claimant has legitimacy in any given dispute. Legitimacy supervenes upon ownership. The just resolution of a dispute distinguishes between legitimate claims and transgressive ones. The legitimacy of a claim is determined by ownership status. All people make claims using this metric to advocate their claim ought be preferred. These probably both be in an in-depth level. It's kind of the same thing as the first one anyway. Not really though. Oops, undo. Alright, so all people make claims using this metric to advocate their claim ought be preferred. In other words, their claim is more legitimate because of some legitimizing aspect to their claim. Thus, we oppose unjustified use of violence and affirm that occurrences of such comprise criminality and use the law justly to respond to such criminality where constitutionally empowered to do so. In other words, we don't want to violate people's rights. And we also want to do the job of government, which is often coercive. How to manage that is going to be about determining the legitimacy of claims by legitimate means. Okay? So, if you'd like to follow along on this platform, by the way, you can access it. There's a public link. The public link is, I'll put it in the in the live stream thing. Copy link. Done. Okay, so if we go over here to the dashboard, sorry for the slowness in the live stream, or if you're watching this later as a video, sorry for the delay here. I should have put this in here sooner. I didn't, shame on me. Boo hoo hoo. Whatever shall I do, etc., etc. Naturally occurring comments one's going to make in such a stunningly interesting context. Okay, so anyway, yeah, technical difficulties. Always everybody's favorite part of any broadcast. Waiting, the waiting, the excitement, the uncertainty. You don't know. You don't know what's going to happen during this time when people are having technical difficulties. It could be the most exciting part of the show. It could be the least exciting part of the show. There, wait. Oh, almost. Yeah, okay. And, yeah, and pow. Oh, yeah. Okay, so accomplished. I'm an accomplished fellow. I accomplish things. There we go. Let's close this thing. It says all changes have been saved, and I'm assuming that means including the one I just made. Philip does say all. Okay, now back to business. The next part of this is really the bulk of it and the important part, frankly. Understanding wealth, fungibility, physical and metaphysical currencies. Scroll down to the next page. Economic policy and wealth. The particulars of fungible leverage. Discursive Part 1. Discursive problems inherent in perceptions of public policy and wealth. Section 1. The distribution illusion. Causes of the distribution illusion. Number 1. It is true that any physical object can be possessed. It is true that for all physical things, individuals can make ownership claims upon them. It is true that for all physical things but the body, an ownership claim can be made upon a thing. An ownership claim can be made. An ownership claim made upon a thing by one or more individuals might be legitimate. So, except for the human body, an ownership claim made upon a physical object by one or more individuals might be legitimate. D. It is true that for any physical object with multiple instances, we can gather instances of it into a pile. E. It is true that we can make distributive distinctions along ownership lines. 1. By comparing the frequency of claims won by given individuals, in other words, by seeing how frequently a given object has the ownership status of Joe's, against the average frequency at which claims are won, meaning how many such objects does the average person in here have? Does the average person have 4? By individuals comprising the claimants, that's everybody in the group, each of whom is linked to at least one object in the set. So everybody who's being measured, their percentage of ownership of the set must have at least one thing in the set. In which case, you have an example of the distribution of money in the population. Okay? These are things that are true about the pile of money representing all the money in the country and how it's measured in terms of distribution. Number 2. Manifestations of wrongness are indicative of the distribution. Number 2 covers manifestations of wrongness indicative of the distribution illusion. So, a watchmaker's fallacy is a phenomenon that emerges from the capacity of language to remove from any expression of meaning the observer. Obviously, no instance of language is produced in a vacuum. Yet every sentence is said or written by a specific person. But when English allows us to present ideas as though they were divorced from any observer, it creates the illusion that impacts can occur without agency making them happen. For example, One might think it remarkable that various businesses that comprise our communities are all able to attain what they need when they need it. A new order of eggs comes into Denny's shortly before they exhaust their supply. One might conclude from this that the central distribution organization is very effective and successful at keeping track of everybody's needs, consumption rates, and delivery timetables. Of course, this is not the case. There is no central agency distributing all the things various businesses need to conduct their enterprises. Instead, each business pursues its own interests by engaging directly with a specific other business also pursuing its own interests. Okay? D. For wealth, this plays out as arguments that assume wealth inequality is a consequence of an unfair distributor, just as the example played out as a false assumption must be resultant of a very effective distributor. So, just because Denny's gets eggs when they need them doesn't mean there's a central distributor checking on all the restaurants finding out what they need. And such it is that arguments against dramatic wealth distribution inequalities necessarily make a category error. What does this mean, category error? Let's find out. Well, distribution equity can no more be a phenomenon of centralized directorial concern than we can address directly via public policy that we can address. So distribution, the equality of distribution, the relative equality, the relative strength of individual links between some individuals against others in that distribution curve. In other words, the top 1%, 99% below kind of thing, right? It can't be a phenomenon of centralized directorial concern. In other words, it can't be directed because it can't be one that's directed in such a way that we can address directly by a public policy that directional impetus. We can no more do that than can an outbreak of nihilism threaten a herd of cattle. Cattle are not subject to nihilism, just as wealth is not subject to distribution. Our normal understanding between concrete realities and abstract representations of those realities is that our symbols, words, emerge to represent approximately something that is not approximate, but instead the thing in itself. Wealth represents. It's not the one and only. The most clear instance where things work the other way around. Wealth is real and absolute in its metaphysical form and symbolized in physical objects we call dollars. Definition of wealth, a few different ways. The thing is, most people when they talk about taxation or economics, they don't begin with a grappling of the definition of wealth, what it is, what its attributes are, how to utilize policy to impact its interaction with the world. And so, obviously, economic policy is always going to be wrong. If you haven't determined what wealth is, this thing you're making policy to direct, then you're going to have a very difficult time understanding why your policies don't work. Definition of wealth, a few different ways. First, the application of labor to a resource produces something called wealth when that labor is rendered useful to a party other than the laborer. B. Another way in which one might understand wealth is as an expression of sustenance time frame. This refers to each person's need to attain a minimum amount of specific resources to survive, especially food. Thus, it's conceivable to imagine a farmer, for example, to store large amounts of food with the intention of eating it. By shoring up the certainty of his own future, he's utilizing a form of wealth that doesn't provide any utility to others. While this may be a legitimate form of wealth, it represents almost no actual economic activity in the contemporary status quo. C. Given that we can mostly ignore definition B, then, wealth relates to utility. D. If we imagine an economic exchange between individuals before the widespread use of money, we imagine the trading of one kind of good for another. E. But actually, most such economic exchanges were certainly not concurrent. That is to say, it wasn't like, here, you hand me the bread and I'll hand you the fish. Okay, deal. Then most exchanges don't happen like that. At least, probably historically, most of the significant exchanges anyway. Instead, one party would provide assistance to another when that other party needed assistance. General assistance might be needed because of a lack of manpower, or specific assistance might be needed because of a lack of expertise. This provision of requested utility created wealth. Even though there was no money, okay, the wealth expressed in terms of beholdens. Both parties acknowledged, either formally or tacitly, that the help receiver might be called upon to return the favor provided. When the help provider does thus call upon the other party to provide, and the former provision receiver reciprocally provides utility, the initial help provider spends that wealth that he acquired by providing help in the first place. The wealth persisted between the two events, despite no linkage to any physical objective representation of leverage. So there probably wasn't an IOU given, although in theory there could be. Because both parties remembered the first event, and neither could therefore convince the other it hadn't occurred, the leverage is implicit to the nature of ontological expression, namely that I remember, it's on the flow. You can be held accountable for that which you've said and done before. Wealth, therefore, is leverage, the ability to get others to do things for you. Okay? Money is a symbol of leverage. All currencies are fiat currencies. We used to believe there to be a distinction between backed currencies, like the gold standard, which had a concrete legitimacy, and can I see not? Oh, why can you not own your own body? Well, okay, you do own your own body. The thing is, you can't, but you own your own body, but you can't sell it. So it's an ownership. You have the ownership rights that can be violated, namely, it's possible to violate your ownership rights, your property rights against your body, but it's not possible for you to render them into fungible form. In other words, you can't sell your own body for money, because if you do, then you still are trying to retain your will, but you provided access to the control of your body to another person, and therefore given up your will. If the other person truly owned you, then you'd have no means of ever utilizing the money you attained for it. So unless you support slavery, it's necessary to conclude that you do own your own body and that you can't sell it. The reason you can't sell really is because it's a false promise. It's saying, I promise for you to own me, but you never will be able to own me because you don't get to sit behind the wheel and turn the wheels of my will. You rely upon me to continually go along with what you're doing, whether I want to or not. Okay, so money is a symbol of leverage. As I was saying, we used to believe there would be a distinction between backed currencies, gold standard, which had a concrete legitimacy, and unbacked currencies, fiat, which could never attain such legitimacy. The reason that this was never true is that whatever one backs the currency with is no more really wealth than anything else concrete. Gold is not just another fungible symbol. It gains its ability to represent wealth by virtue of its scarcity, which enables a non-inflationary money, and by virtue of its inherent distinction, which prevents counterfeiting and ensuring against inflation, and by convertibility, which preserves or which guarantees value, which stabilizes via what's the word? Validation. Okay, validation of others. Possibility that even advanced paper bills might be counterfeited is one of two ways in which a backed currency is more legitimate than an unbacked currency. Namely, gold is less counterfeitable and thus a more reliable symbol of wealth. Okay, but that has to do with convertibility, of course. If something is backed, really that just means it's convertible directly into gold. It's already convertible into gold. You can buy gold with it. The second way is that the body producing the notes must be stable. An unstable government who produces notes without regard to how they work as fungible representations of a thing that only is real metaphysically can kill the value of currency and cause actual wealth to be destroyed with bad economic policy. So it's something we have to avoid because obviously we want our currency to preserve its wealth. If I have $1,000 in the bank today, I want it to buy as much as tomorrow as it would today. So I don't have to spend it all right now. Cryptocurrencies reflect the reality that wealth's real form is metaphysical while its symbolic form is usually physical. If I asked for a pound of gold and you gave me a piece of paper with a pound of gold written on it, I'd object that those were not the same thing. However, if you gave me enough paper dollar bills to equal the value of a pound of gold, I'd accept the equivalency. I can use those to buy exactly the same thing, a pound of gold, from somebody else. So that's fine. And it doesn't matter that it's a different pound of gold that I'm buying. They're all the same. So the only difference here is the metaphysical distinction we make. Papers turned into dollars meet the criteria of fungibility, while papers written on and not dollar bills do not. Cryptocurrency proves that the real form is metaphysical. It demonstrates the necessary components of fungibility do not require rendering into a physical form. Money is the only thing that works this way, this well. The other things that work this way are things like contracts, IOUs, treaties, stuff like that. All right, well, that's it for the document. That's my overview of what wealth is, basically. But at least part one of it. Part two, I'm going to go into issues of how existing taxation policy impacts every American in their pocketbooks and impacts the economy as a whole. I'm going to try to explain why, in the status quo, the way that progressivism expresses itself in the tax code is extraordinarily regressive and functionally manifests as something of an assault on those least well off among us. There's a mistake to believe, it's a huge mistake to believe that coerced wealth redistribution is good for the poor. It's not good for anyone, and nobody is an example of the poor. There are some among us who are poorer than others. Right now, I'm quite poor. I don't really have any money, and I'm just kind of scraping by. But probably most people wouldn't consider me among the disenfranchised poor. The problem is every attempt to reduce a bunch of individuals to members of this class of people called the disenfranchised poor neglects to account for the fact that each individual is an individual trying to attain prosperity in their own way. And if you insist that there's a status of disenfranchisement, which requires government action to be more fair in distribution, then you commit the distribution illusion fallacy and you end up harming the cause you seek to support. If your cause is let's make everyone more prosperous, if your cause is let's make the income gap close, well, first understand whether you seek gains in absolute wealth or gains in relative wealth. and relative poverty. If you seek the status gains of everyone being more equal, even if the unequal people are on an absolute prosperity level, not suffering any sort of deprivation, that's a different kind of argument than if you're saying there's absolute poverty here, real deprivation where people can't get by, don't have the basics to actually live. Make sure you understand which of those metrics you're measuring on and make sure you measure consistently. And if you do, then you'll come to understand that, in fact, progressivism in the tax code is the most regressive thing, the most regressive form of economic policy imaginable. Unavoidably so. Any illusionary gains it accomplishes are attained via some notion that we are assuming that solvency takes care of itself, or that there's a link there that doesn't actually exist, or something like that. So, I just got the one question here about, can I sell not my own body? No, you can't sell not your own body. And if there's nothing further, I guess I will call it a live stream. That's my explanation of wealth, etc. I'll put it up as a regular video. Please do donate to my campaign if you want. It's right here. GoFundMe / whatever. Let's see. Sign in using my Facebook account. Okay. I'll do that. Let's see what happens. Will it be a magical adventure of learning? Probably. Come on. Give me my magical adventure of learning. Don't be like that. Okay, good. So, here's my page, and you can see it's this one. GoFundMe.com/host Eric for president with hyphens in between. 2020. GoFundMe/host Eric for president 2020. Oh yeah, I have got $65 out of 100,000. That's pretty damn good. Okay, so you can vote for me for president. You can fund me for president. You can comment upon this video. You can do anything you want at Alice's restaurant, except in Alice. You're familiar with that song. Yeah. Anywho, that's economic policy part 1, understanding wealth, stuff like that. We'll get into capital gains tax. We're going to get rid of capital gains taxes for sure. For sure, we're going to help poor people by getting rid of capital gains taxes. We're going to help poor people by getting rid of income tax and Social Security taxes to the extent we possibly can. Now, no, my tax plan is independent of my tax reform here. I think my tax plan is great, and it doesn't need to touch the contemporary tax code. But it doesn't mean I don't want to also touch the contemporary tax code in a separate set of behaviors. I do believe that we can do a better job of cutting down on the 14,000 plus pages of federal tax code that comprise the federal taxation system. If you in fact believe that the tax code as it stands produces a legal form of taxation, then I don't know what to tell you, but a law has to be sufficiently in plain language and of sufficient brevity and sense that the average citizen can read and understand it so they know how to follow it. It is never acceptable to expect anybody to read 14,000 pages of code to understand what they're legally required to do. Nor should it ever be required for somebody to hire somebody to tell them what they're legally required to do because they can't understand the law because the law is 14,000 pages worth of complicated. So, we know the federal tax code does not comprise any sort of legally just, legally sound, legally legitimate way of taking money from people. I'm not saying there are not legitimate ways to tax people. I'm just saying the federal government is not using any of those legitimate ways to tax people. So one of the things I'm going to do when I get there in Washington, D.C., as President of the United States, is attempt to influence the legislature to take up a serious legislative agenda regarding taxation. And serious means not more complicated nonsense. It means scrap a bunch of stuff, start over. If you want to do your progressive stuff, I mean, there are always going to be people who are greedy like that, who say, "I want to help only those people who already have money. I want to stop people having it, don't have it yet. I want to stop people who don't have it yet from ever acquiring it." Those people who want to do that to the poor are the same people as are in favor of progressive taxation, corporate taxes, high capital gains taxes. They believe incorrectly, they're well intentioned, they believe incorrectly that this helps people who have less. It always hurts people who have less because no house painter, for example, has ever been hired by a poor man. When the rich person has less disposable income because it's been taken by the government and redistributed in some fashion, the thing he puts off and doesn't pay for is things like a new paint job on the house. So the government's taken, let's say, $1,000. They've sent back out into the economy in various ways, say 750, lost 250 in the process of paying people to move that around, and almost none of it's helped any individual citizen directly. In contrast, that $1,000 goes directly to the other citizen as newly generated wealth. Well, I love you too, Carolina Carpenter. That's a weird experience. I'm sure that's not what Carolina Carpenter actually looks like. I bet you Carolina Carpenter is a dude in his chair at home eating Doritos. Anyway, Carolina Carpenter, if you really do look like that, thank you for your ego gratifying words. And that's going to be about it for this live stream. If there are any more chat comments or anything like that, please vote for me or consider sharing news of my candidacy with your friends and neighbors. And God bless America. Have a good night. Sleep well. The end.